Nintendo is one of those game companies that somehow manages to screw up in spectacular fashion, but still be beloved by its fans. Nintendo has been around for a long time, and has amassed quite the impact on modern day culture. They are responsible for making some of the best games of all time, and having some of the most iconic consoles as well. Almost everybody at some point has played at least one Nintendo game, and with the recent success of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, I'm sure they'll continue to be relevant for a long time. However, Nintendo being a gaming company has made many mistakes that has caused them to tarnish their own reputation on multiple occasions. So I want to go over some of the mistakes made by them, because there's quite a lot, and it's fun to look back at the past and see just how much Nintendo has crashed and burned. First, I want to briefly talk about the console wars. During the 90s, Nintendo and Sega were in a fierce competition to see who truly deserved to get all your money. Dubbed the console wars, these two companies were the heads of the video game industry at the time, and would try many tactics to sell themselves as being the best, either boasting about what great exclusives they had, or how powerful their hardware was, even outright mudslinging each other during commercials like it was a political campaign.
16-bit arcade hits. What Nintendo?
The point is, each company constantly tried to outdo the other. So when Sega started to implement add-ons to the Sega Genesis to make it more powerful, Nintendo tried to follow suit. More specifically, Nintendo tried to make their own CD-based add-on, like the Sega CD. But unlike Sega, Nintendo wanted to make sure that their add-on would be worthwhile, so they turned to Sony to potentially help with it. The development for the CD add-on actually went deep into production, producing many prototypes, some even being found in the wild. But just as they were set to announce the add-on, Nintendo got cold feet since they felt uncomfortable with the deal they struck with Sony. This deal basically allowed Sony to retain most of the profits from the add-on. This worried Nintendo so much that they decided to go behind Sony's back and strike a deal with their competitor, Philips, to produce a CD-based system that could use Nintendo-based properties instead of being an add-on to the Super Nintendo. Nintendo then announced their partnership with Philips at that year's Consumer Electronics Show, surprising even Sony, since the day before, Sony had already shown off their CD-based add-on, or as it was known, the Nintendo PlayStation. So Nintendo effectively burnt the bridge with Sony in favor of making the now infamous Philips CDI, which is known as one of the worst consoles of all time, while Sony decided to take what they already had and make the now famous PlayStation brand. That's right, Nintendo inadvertently created their biggest rival because of their own stubbornness, and to add insult to injury, the PlayStation would proceed to dominate the upcoming console generations.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch!
I want to deviate from the consoles for a second and talk about the handhelds. There was no denying that this is where Nintendo truly shined with the Game Boy. Part of the massive success for it was that it was the first truly portable system, which allowed many people to experience gaming on the go on a screen that was barely visible half the time. But that didn't matter because of Tetris. So what did they decide to do next? How about making a handheld system that had to be worn at all times and also had to be set on a table, but it will also give you a headache if you wore it for too long? The Virtual Boy, a truly disastrous piece of technology that no one in their right mind will want to use, let alone buy. Nintendo was once again way too confident that their name alone would sell consoles, but that simply wasn't the case, since this handheld was just way too ahead of its time. This thing basically tried to emulate virtual reality, but in the 90s, with an underpowered console that could only display in black and red. From what I understand, the Virtual Boy was rushed into production because the N64 still wasn't ready, and Nintendo wanted to release something to hold fans over. It was downscaled by a lot since the production costs were way too high, which resulted in the system that we have now. It also didn't help that there was absolutely no games for it, at least no games that people actively wanted to play. Again, there is no surprise why this thing bombed and was quickly discontinued soon after release. So as you can tell, Nintendo likes to do a lot of gimmicks to sell their stuff, but mostly because it was successful in the past. When the Nintendo Entertainment System was released here in the States, the video game market was dead due to the video game crash of '83, causing many companies to think that they were no longer profitable. But in a marketing strategy, they sold their video game console not as a video game console, but rather an entertainment system that came with toys and accessories that just so happened to play video games. and this actually ended up working. And Nintendo single-handedly revived the video game market in the US, effectively taking control of the entire market as well. But as the years went by, Nintendo began to lose customers to its competitors, even being placed in dead last during the GameCube era. Maybe feeling a little desperate, they decided to pivot their next console from more powerful hardware to instead focus the entire thing on motion controls. And it worked! The Wii was a smash success, since the idea behind the console was so simple. Just move your arm, and the character on screen will do the same. It was a phenomenon, and it caused Nintendo to outright beat the competition with little effort. This was one of the most successful products that Nintendo has ever made, so feeling a little bit comfortable, they decided to follow it up with one of the worst bombs in video game history.
I'll be crying if I look like that too, bro. That's fucked up what they be doing to y'all.
But before we get to that, let's talk about the handheld real quick. Nintendo was the only real player in town when it came to handheld systems, especially when the DS came out, since that became one of the most successful products that Nintendo has ever made, period, being the second highest selling console of all time. This thing was truly a force to be reckoned with, so when the follow-up to that console was announced, it got a lot of people excited. The Nintendo 3DS. It was a system that promised to have glasses-free 3D, back when 3D was a huge thing, as well as being as powerful as the GameCube. Nintendo hyped this thing up like the next big thing. Sounds great, until you saw the price, $250. This was a steep price for sure, and many thought it was not worth it, especially for a handheld. To put it in perspective, the Switch Lite, which is way more powerful than the 3DS, cost only $200 at release. Coupled with the fact that the 3DS had no real gains for the longest time, this thing basically almost failed at release. Nintendo knew they screwed up and tried to save the console as fast as they could. They ended up slashing the prices by nearly $100, as well as giving free games to the early adopter as an apology for giving them a useless console with a gimmick that didn't really work. Eventually, the 3DS did get better, but those early years were rough to say the least. But I can't say the same thing for the Wii U. So it's no secret that the follow-up console to the Wii U, is a laughingstock. Nintendo thought that they could once again coast by with the name recognition alone, but failed to recognize that their huge audience weren't die-hard fans and were most likely not going to buy another console that most people didn't even know what it did. The Wii was simple. The Wii U, it's confusing to even describe what it is, and most people have just assumed it was another add-on for the Wii. So the Wii U was entirely sold on its new gimmick, the tablet, which was promoted as being a hybrid type console that you could use without the TV, but also didn't allow you to walk away from the console for more than 5 feet before it began to have connectivity issues. And it also had a bad battery life and was a bit uncomfortable to use for some. Not only that, but the games that were selling for it were not something that you would buy a whole new system over. New Super Mario Bros. U was a game which people weren't all too excited about, especially since another game of the series just came out that same year, and people felt that this series had long overstayed its welcome. They also promoted a weird theme park party game that tried to be the successor to Wii Sports, but failed to gain even the slightest bit of interest, and a slew of third-party games that had already been released on other consoles for more than a year now. The point being, this thing was marketed poorly, but unlike, let's say, the PS3 that started out rough but eventually got better, the Wii U never did, and Nintendo did an absolutely abysmal job at selling this thing. They tried to cater to a more adult audience by having edgier games like Zombie U, but a majority of commercials look like this.
It doesn't matter who wins or loses, as long as we're all together.
Please buy the Wii U. Which made a lot of people cringe at the idea of even owning this thing.
Whoa-shi! It's a double Yoshi explosion!
Nintendo was in a panic, and in an attempt to save face, they slashed the price of this thing, which Nintendo only does to consoles that are underperforming, as well as promising better games to come. And sure, a lot of these games were great, but again, by the time they were being released, most people weren't going to buy a Wii U because they had no reason to, unless they were already a Nintendo fan. Not even Smash Bros. Could save this thing, that's how bad this thing performed. But what I think killed this console was Nintendo's attitude towards the internet. If you don't know, Nintendo doesn't really understand how the internet works. The Wii had some good online games, but a majority of those games will run like this. Not only that, but they have a huge problem with people trying to share their footage online, often issuing copyright claims and strikes to people just trying to share funny moments of the games online because they care about the intellectual property too much and would do anything to protect it. even if that meant going after a small gaming channel that dared to make content on their new Mario game. It's no secret that Nintendo has a rather shitty attitude towards its fans, seemingly having no respect for them and care way too much about their profits more than anything else. This is why they constantly go after people who dare modify the consoles or emulate their ass-old games that aren't available for purchase anymore. That's why Nintendo constantly goes after fan games, because they see it as an infringement on their IP and see it as a potential loss of sales. It's in their legal right to do so, but when Nintendo decides to throw someone in prison over it and then makes them pay 20 to 30% of their paychecks to pay off their debt, then you know something's kinda fucked up. Nintendo's greedy attitude made them do one of the worst mistakes during the Wii U era, that being the Nintendo Partnership Program. So before this thing was introduced, Nintendo would claim any online content that just so happened to have any one of their properties on it. There was no dispute in it either. If you made content that had nothing to do with Nintendo, but dared to post a small clip or even use music from them, that content would then be claimed by them, and all the profits would go to them, screwing over the content creator. You couldn't even stream the games either, that's how bad it got. This basically killed Nintendo's online presence for a long time, and as a result, nobody wanted to make content of their games in fear that their work would immediately be claimed by Nintendo. But figuring out that this wasn't exactly the best image for them, they decided that people could finally play and stream their games, but only if they joined their partnership program. Sounds cool, but then you would read the conditions and learn that the whole partnership was just bad. Nintendo would claim 50% of the revenue, not taking into consideration that most platforms take an additional 30% of that revenue, leaving the content creator with the table scraps. This rapidly made it so a lot of content creators to not even bother with making content on their games because the downsides were too great. This effectively sealed their fate for the Wii U. You know how most games nowadays blow up because people online post and make content that makes them extremely popular? Well, Nintendo basically threw all of that away in favor of getting the least amount of publicity possible. So with all these factors in play, this caused the Wii U, and even the 3DS to a certain extent, to greatly suffer. Of course, Nintendo will lift this partnership entirely, and now people can finally post content with their stuff on it, but it was too little too late for the Wii U, as it was seen as a massive failure, selling a measly 13.5 million units during its lifetime, with Scott DeWaz owning the majority of that stock. This was one of the worst performing consoles for Nintendo, and it was a bad time for them all around. Iwata, the then CEO of Nintendo, personally cut his own salary so his employees could stay employed. Nintendo stocks were at an all-time low, and many weren't even sure if they were going to last for much longer if they kept this performance up. Luckily, Nintendo did make a major comeback with the Switch, because not only did they market it amazingly, but it also had a lot of promising and exciting games coming for it as well. It also helped that the gimmick this time around actually was understandable, that being a hybrid console that could be used both at home and as a portable system, finally making it worthwhile for people to own. The Switch has been so successful for Nintendo that it's become the third best selling console at the time of this recording, and who knows where it's gonna end up by the end of its life cycle. While Nintendo has made a lot of mistakes in the past, some big and some worse, it's good to know that Nintendo will never screw up again and has certainly learned their lesson.
Paid service, so I'm hoping that they start really giving us something to get excited about.
Nintendo themselves have taken down my Twitch channel.
Confirmed from Nintendo that Nintendo is out of Evo.
Official emulators that play worse than their free unofficial alternatives.
Yep, never screw up again.